This is the companion video for Worksheet 12. Most likely this video is going to be broken up into multiple pieces, so keep an eye out for more than one video on this one since we do have to cover a lot of practice questions. So most likely I'm going to stop the video and start a new one once we get to a good stopping point. But first things first, I do want to kind of talk a little bit about what arrays are and what are collections before we hop into the practice stuff. So if we look at the PowerPoint for this week called arrays, the first slide talks about just collections and what is a collection. And collections are an important part in programming, and I don't want to say all, but most languages that you're going to work with have some form of collections in them. But all a collection is just a grouping of similar objects that we can manipulate and work with like all at once. So, an example in real life, pride of lions, parliament of rooks, murder of crows. But in programming, you would have like a bunch of integers or a bunch of strings, and they all kind of correlate together in some kind of way. The two most important C# collections are lists and arrays. In this course, we're only going to cover arrays. If you go on with programming, you will learn about doing lists, and there are a couple other types of collections as well, such as like dictionaries and stuff. But we're just going to focus on arrays in this course. So what is an array? It's just a very simple collection, and the best way to kind of think of what an array is thinking about a program that you've most likely worked with before, such as Excel, where you can kind of think of an array as a fixed collection of maybe like cells or something like that, like compartments. And like, let's say that we have one that has, let's do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 5. But the only thing about arrays is that they can only hold one type of variable at a time. So like this would be possibly like an int array, and it can only hold integers. You could have another array, maybe this one just has 3, and this is a string array, and it can only hold strings in it. Let me write some in here. So the big thing to remember about arrays is it's only one type. So, one pride or lions, an array of integers, an array of strings. We can't mix and match. So like we couldn't have like a random array that has like a mixture of like integers, floats, and strings. This will not work. So no, we can't do that. It has to be one of each type. And the thing too is that these are fixed arrays. So when we declare them, and we have to tell exactly how long that array is. And once we declare that array, we can't change the length of them. So, if we need to add extra slots, like let's say you make an integer array that has 5 slots, if you want to make another one that has, if you need to add a 6th one on there, you're going to have to make a whole new array and copy that information into that array, and then the extra information on it. So arrays are fixed in size. So once you declare it, that's it, unless you make a whole brand new one. So keep that in mind with when you're creating these. So let's see, arrays are their own type. It's a collection of data types. They are fixed in length. We'll talk about how to actually access them when we get into the like the practice exercises. But if you do need to refer to like some basics of how to like declare an array and look at an array, you can look at this PowerPoint. But we're going to kind of go over that now as we go through the practice exercises. So let me move this to the side. And let me get set up in Unity. 1 second. Okay, the video probably just stopped and jumped, but I didn't want to show you me setting up the Unity project to work in. It's just a very simple project, just like we do for all the worksheets, where it's just a new Unity project. I just have an empty game controller object that's holding my script. I'm calling the script for now Worksheet 12. Since this is just practice, you can call it whatever you want, but make sure you're good to go before you start working along with me. So if you need to pause the video, feel free, but we are going to jump into the practice with Worksheet 12, and a lot of these will get answered as we go through them. So let's see, practice number 1, declare 3 different arrays that hold different types of objects and practice filling them in. Okay, so we are just going to do this in the start. If you want to make a note to yourself with that, like if you want to, leave yourself a little comment saying question 1, you can do that. Sorry about that. There might be a little bit of a weird edit there. I had some technical issues, but let's just jump into doing question 1. And if we look at question 1, the directions say to declare 3 different arrays that hold different types of objects and practice filling them. So the first one we can work on that would be an easy one to do and that you'll probably be using a lot would be an array of integers. So to declare an array, what you need to do first is, the first thing you type in is what variable type is this array going to hold. So we are going to make an int one. You then need to put in the square brackets. And this is telling the program that you are creating an array, not just an integer. That's kind of like the big difference. And then you give it a name just like any other variable. And we could call this whatever we wanted to call it. But, we're just going to be simple. We want to make sure that this is named something, that we understand. So I'm just going to call it int array. Then you set that equal to new int, square brackets again, and then how many elements do you want in there? And we're just going to do 3. And the word element, that is what we call, each individual item, if we think of it as like the spreadsheet or the cells, each cell is an element. That's the wording that you should use, is element. So this is going to be a 3-element array, which means that it can hold 3 integers in there. This is how you declare it, and let's practice filling it in. So just, normally if we had like an integer that we named x, we could just say, x is equal to like a number. In order to access a specific element in the array, we have to tell it what element do we want to access. And we do that by putting the name of the array, the square brackets, and which element you want to work with. And since we want to start with the first one, that's actually element 0. In arrays, we start with 0. And a lot of programming does that too, where the first thing isn't 1, it's 0. And it's really important that you kind of get this into your head. Otherwise, you're going to run into problems where you're either trying to access the wrong element or you're going to go off the end. Because if we have a 3-element array, the elements are 0, 1, and 2. If you try to access element 3, you're going to get an error called an out-of-range exception. And that means that you are trying to access an element that does not exist in your array. So if you ever see out-of-range exception with an array, you're trying to look at an element that doesn't actually exist. You're out of the range of that array. So 0 is the first element, and we can just set that equal to, yeah, 1's fine, I guess, any number that we want. To get to the next one, that'd be int array 1. And we can set that to whatever number we want, then int array 2. And that is how we would, declare an array, an int array, and fill it. There are a couple other ways that we could do that, and we can try that with the next one. We'll do a string array next. So again, to do a string array, we need to say what is it going to hold, brackets, and then give it a name. Equal to new string. And if we know right away what we want to fill that with, we can do that all in one line. So, rather than putting the number in here, we could then just do a curly brace and, between the curly braces, fill in what we want to have in our array. And keep in mind though, this is setting the length of the array by, automatically filling it in. You're not going to always know what you want to have in your array, so this isn't something that you can rely on all the time. So understanding this method is important too. And then we end that with a semicolon. So 2 different ways to fill that. For the third one, I am just not going to quite fill it because I do want, if you want to practice that, you can. But I do want to mention that, ints and strings are fine. You can fill these also with specific Unity types. Like we could do an array of text objects. So, if we add our, up here at the top, using Unity engine.ui, let's say that we had some public class level variables, public text, first text, like we normally do. Like we're pretending that we have all of these text. These text objects in Unity that maybe we have to write information to them. We can store those in an array too. We can just say text array is equal to new text, and we could either fill them outright or we could go through and assign them individually, because we could just say text array 0, which remember arrays start at 0, is equal to first text. Text array 1 is equal to second text. Text array 2, which would be the last one, third text. So don't feel limited that you can only do arrays of strings and numbers. We can do an array of whatever kind of variable we want. We can have an array of text objects. We can have an array of buttons. We can have an array of game objects. We can have an array of renderers, for changing colors. We can have an array of colors. We can have an array of, what else would be interesting? You would say game objects, whatever you can declare as an array, you can throw into an array. I'm sorry, whatever you can declare as a variable, you can throw into an array. So, keep that in mind as you, go through the class and interesting ways that you can use arrays to make your life easy. So that's question 1. let's see, what's question 2? Declare an int array with 10 elements and use a for loop to fill it using a random number generator. Okay, so this is a good example of a way that we can use a for loop with arrays. For loops and arrays, they go together. I guess you could say like peanut butter and jelly, but you're going to use for loops a lot when it comes to transversing through an array. So let me actually make a new function for this one, and I'm just going to I'll call it in the start so that it runs, but we'll just call this one like question 2, and then down here I'll just make a private void question 2, and we'll just do question 2 in here. This is good practice since it's going to be a little bit more complicated, and you might want to you could do something like you could take like the text of this and like leave it as a comment in here so that you know exactly what you're doing. It might be useful, and then you can look back on it later too for if you're trying to review stuff. So declare an int array with 10 elements and use a for loop to fill it using a random number generator. Okay, so again, what type is going to be stored in the array? Square brackets. Name your array. Set that equal to new. And then again, what type is it? Square brackets. And then inside the square brackets, how many elements? And then use a for loop to fill it. So I'll explain it as I'm typing it out, but we just do the for loop, just like we've been doing it. So we'd say for, and since we need to step through our array, we want to start with the first element. And remember, the first element is 0, because we're going to be using this counter in here to actually do our stepping through. And you'll see that once we get it typed out. It's really pretty elegant how this works. So we're going to make our int x equal to 0, because we want to be able to get that first element. X is less than 10, x plus plus. We want to make sure that we're less than 10 because we never want x to be equal to 10, because remember, since we're starting at 0, if we try to hit element 10, we're going to get that out of range exception. So we need to start 0 and then less than 10. And now inside, we just need to access the array at what current element number is associated with x. So we do this, watch, int array, and then we just put x in here is equal to random.range, and we'll just do 1, 10. So we'll just be all 1 through 9 technically, and that's it. This is a great way to show how to step through an array. So if we were to kind of write this out, if we were had our whiteboard or a piece of paper, we'd say, okay, first x is equal to 0, int array x, so element 0, set it equal to a random number. X gets raised by 1. Int array element at 1, give it a random number. Int array element 2, etc., etc. So if you need to set up a for loop to step through an array, this is how you do it, is this kind of basic setup. And that should be it for question 2. So take a moment, make sure that it's working. If you wanted to, you could always do actually let's do it. We'll do a quick print, and we'll say element, and we'll print x. And we'll say has, then we'll print what is currently in that int array in that spot, like that. So we should see like 0 through 9, and then it's going to print whatever we ended up, that random number that we ended up storing in there. So let's try this out. So I'm going to save it, hop over to Unity, give it a moment. let me comment out that this stuff up here, so that it's not messing up anything that we're doing. I just need to do this right here. Okay. Unity. Another moment. There it goes. Okay. So element 0 has 5, element 1 has 6, and it goes all the way down through. And we do stop at element 9. If we did try to accidentally access element 10, we would get that out of range exception right here. Okay, let's go on to the next one. It's just a little bit more practice. Declare an int array with 20 elements and use a for loop to fill it. Find the sum of all the numbers in the array. So this is something that we can actually do. We don't need to do 2 loops. We can actually, as we fill an array, find the sum. Because if you remember, sum is just adding up all of those numbers. So let me do a question 3 function. And let's just hide this. And I'll make one down here. Question 3. And okay, so it's kind of, the basics. Again, we need to declare our 20 element array. So int array. If you want to name it something else, that's fine. It's equal to new int, and this one's going to be 20. The other thing I want to do is I need to keep track of that sum. And I want to do that as I'm filling the array to make my life easy. And we can do that by having an int sum, set that equal to 0. So as we make that random number, we can just add that to the sum. And as we go through, it'll get that sum for us. So let's write our for loop. For int x is equal to 0, x is less than 20, x plus plus. So again, we just need to put that random number in. So we'll say int array at element x is equal to random.range. And do I specify the range of the random numbers? No. We'll just do that 1 to 10 again. And then once we have that, we'll just say sum plus equals whatever we just threw in that array at element x. So it starts at 0, and then it'll add this random number into it, go to the next one. Once it gets this random number, add that into it, et cetera, et cetera. So, we could have done another for loop where we, after we fill it, then we step through and find the sum, but, might as well be efficient about this. We can do it all at once. And after the loop, we can print out what that sum is. So we'll just say print sum plus sum, just so we know what it is. So let's save it, and we will hop over to Unity, hit play. And we're getting a sum of 90. We didn't print out the individual ones, but so we'll assume that it's working correctly. If you really wanted to go through and have it print all the elements and figure that out, you could. But that is it for question 3. See what's next. Use any of the arrays previously defined. Find the length of the array with code. So this is a really important concept, and this is going to kind of save you, a lot of, I don't know, it'll just make things a little bit easier for you. And that is the concept of trying to figure out the length of an array without having to hard code in a number. So let me just do it this way. So I'm just going to make a question 4 And let me write question 4 down here. And so in order to step through the array with the for loop, we've been hard coding in this number where it's the length of it. But what if you don't necessarily know the length of it? What if you have different arrays? Like we have this, 10 element array and a 20 element array. But what if we send it through the same function? And if we try to send the 20 slot array through, a for loop that is only going to 10, we're going to get that out of range exception. So a better way to do stuff like this, and if you ever need to know the length of an array for any other purpose, is to use the dot length on that. So let me actually copy this one. I'm going to copy this down here, and I'm going to show you how to change this. So the only thing we have to do is rather than saying, x is less than 10, we can just say int array dot length. And this will give you how many elements. So, it's equal to 10. There's 10 elements. And we do still need to keep it less than because it's going to say 10. Because there are 10 elements, but remember we start at 0. So if we did less than or equal to, we're going to get an out of range exception. And if you want to try that out just to see what it looks like, feel free. But just the name of the array, dot length, will return how many elements in that array. So let me actually just take this out, and we can even do that in a little bit more pure form if you want. We can make a new int called like x. If we set that equal to int array dot length, this is going to spit into there the number 10, and we can even just print that out if we want, and we can see what we get. So let me go up here. I'm going to comment out 2 and 3 because we don't want to see that. We're just going to work with this. And this, if you can ever just get away with doing this, this is better coding than hard coding in that. What happens if you think there's going to be 20 and you code it all with 20, hard code it into all your loops, and then your boss comes back and says, you know what, actually, we only need 10, so please change that to 10. You're going to have to go around in every single spot in your code, like let's say this is a much bigger, bigger code, and replace that 20 with a 10. If instead you just do int array dot length, you would only need to change it here, and then you would be good to go. You wouldn't have to worry about any out of range exceptions. So try to get into the habit of, if you actually just need to do how many, step through your elements or know how many elements, use the name of the array dot length instead. So okay, let's run that question 4 real quick. And we are getting 10 spit off to us. All right, let's do one more in this video, and then I will probably pause it and start a new video with that. Actually, no, let's stop it here because we're going to get into for each loops next. So in the next video, we'll pick up there with for each loops. So look for part 2 of worksheet 12.